This is Éamon Laughlin from Anyone Can Book a Gig, and welcome to the first episode of our Meet the Pros interview series, where we sit down with business professionals from all over the music industry. Today, we're sitting down with Grammy Award-winning producer and manager Matt Pierson, whose career has included everything from working in marketing and A&R for Blue Note, as well as leading Jazz A&R, and eventually becoming executive VP at Warner Brothers Records. His discography as a producer includes the likes of Samara Joy, Joshua Redman, Brad Mehldau, Pat Metheny, Bob James, and countless others. Enjoy the episode.
Welcome, everybody. My name is Matt León. I'm the education manager as well as an artist manager and agent for Music Works International. I'm joined here with Éamon Laughlin, creative manager for Music Works International, and our special guest, our first interviewee, Matt Pierson, who we are very grateful to have here on the series with us. Matt is an award-winning producer, artist manager with a discography that just has everybody on it. So thank you very much, Matt, for taking the time to be with us this morning. This is our first interview, like I said, so let's get into it. Just to set the ground for the interview, we'd like to ask, how did you get started? I know when you and I met a little over a year ago in Brazil, you told me a lot about how your experience as a musician has definitely influenced the way that you function as an industry professional. So how did you get started in the industry, and what made you gravitate towards these various aspects of the industry that you work in?
Well, thanks so much, Matt, and Éamon. I started out as a musician, as a trumpet player, grew up wanting to be a trumpet player, went to college at University of Miami, it was known at the time, the Frost School of Music, as a jazz trumpet major. Was mainly a lead trumpet player, also kind of a jack of all trades, played a lot of different kinds of music, could read really well and had chops and whatever. So I was kind of not quite a soloist, more of a jack of all trades lead player. And I wanted to be Jerry Hay, who was my hero. He's a lead trumpet player and arranger in LA. And my idea was I wanted to be in recording studios. I was a big fan of records. So I was a record collector. I started when I was in college, I started doing some recording. So I would be in a recording studio. I was fascinated about that process. But as a musician, because I was always pursuing a variety of things, I wanted to suck in everything and do a lot of things at once. I always wanted to know how all of these elements came together. So the same way that when I'd look at a record and say, well, who decides who these musicians go together, and who decides the music, and how do they get together in the studio, and who decided, each of these elements and why? I'd always be thinking about that, in particular the why. So you're making a recording. Obviously, it's going to go out in the marketplace. How's it going to go out there? What's going to happen? What happens with this music after we've recorded it? So I was always curious about that. Also, there were records I really loved, but there were records that I thought, oh, they really missed the boat on this one. If only they had tried this. Or, I was an arrogant little shit. So I was, assuming that I could have done better, even though I had never done it. But, what I also did while I was in Miami was I was always interested in what elements of the business related to the music. I don't know who advised me of this. I think it's why I went to University of Miami, because the program was Studio Music and Jazz, it was called. So the idea was you're going to record things that go out into the world. So I was always thinking about the business. And we took this. Back at that time, there was only one music business class, Music Business like 101, which a guy named Alfred Reed taught. And it was just learning the basics of publishing and copyright and record companies and management and touring and the different elements of the business. I was always fascinated by that. So in addition to playing, I started to pursue some other things. I had a radio show at WVOM, the school station. I was the jazz director of the radio station. I did some writing for the school paper, record and gig and performance reviews, interviewed some artists, Randy Brecker and Dave Liebman and some others. I would interview them for the paper. But I also started, once I finished school, when I was playing like 6 nights a week, there were 2 things I did. One was I took a job at Peach's record store I was a record collector and I was spending a lot of my money on records. And I found that if I took a part-time job at the record store, I could get my stuff for cost. So I'd get 40% off if I worked at the store. So I started working there for $4 an hour or whatever it was at that time. But I was able to make up for the low wages by how much money I saved when I'd buy records. But I also found that we would get promotional copies of records for free. So little by little, I got really, because I was into the records and I was into I knew a lot about recordings over time. So I became a really good salesperson on the floor for people, in particular, wanting to buy jazz and other musics I knew well. We were a billboard reporter, which meant that the promotional people from the record companies would call to ask us to report their records. Without going too into this, it was basically payola. Now they after this time instated SoundScan, which was actual accounts of actual sales. Prior to that, reporters would just say whatever they wanted about what they sold, and you'd be trusted. So the promotion people would call and say, "Hey, how'd the Charlie Hayden record do this week?" And you'd say, "Well, we sold one copy." And they'd send you promo copies of other records, and then you'd do your report, and you might say you sold 5 copies. So it was lying, but that was the nature of the business at that point. It wasn't like a radio station getting $100 handshake and a gram of cocaine or something. This was, this wasn't hitman record company stuff. But anyway, I got to know a lot of people in the business. I was really fascinated about the way the business worked. The other thing I did was working for BMI. I started working as a logger for BMI. So I would because I knew a lot of music, because I was a fan of music and I knew a lot of recordings, I would go out and they'd pay me like $15 an hour and pay my expenses to go out into a club that didn't pay their BMI license. And I'd sit there for a couple of hours and write down all the tunes I heard. Then I'd fill out a report. And then they would go after that venue for not paying their license, because on the report, there were a lot of songs that would be BMI songs. It was fun for me because I knew most of the music, but if I didn't know it, I'd take some notes about the song. And the trick then is, obviously, we're talking about 1987. Okay. 1988. So there was no Shazam. There was no internet. All there were books, or, the philo, what was it called? Phonologue, it was called, which was this huge book that we had in record stores where every record available was in this book. And it would have the listings and the catalog numbers so you could order stuff. Well, in there, it would have each artist's discography. So I would have to go to that and do some research and figure it out. So anyway, it was a really good experience for me. So when I finally decided that the trumpet playing thing wasn't what I wanted to do for a living full time, I was already not doing, I was playing 6 nights a week, but I was also doing this other stuff. I kind of finally said, I'm showing up on these gigs. I'm playing, I'd be playing a gig on Miami Beach. There was one gig in particular. I was playing with Ben Vereen or something like that. And I was 25 years old, and I was sitting and playing second trumpet. And next to me, the guy playing lead was 45. And I just imagined in 20 years, maybe I'll be one seat over. And that wasn't enough for me. And although I was playing a lot of music I did love, because I played a lot of great salsa bands and I played in a couple of good big bands, but even more than half the music I was playing, I wasn't enjoying. It was just a paycheck. And I'm like, I'd rather have an effect in the business. So in 1988, I finally decided I'm going to move to New York and get a job in the music business. I had some people I had known through retail, as I said, that were promotion people at record companies. I knew some people at Tower Records in New York. So I moved up and I got a job in the cassette department at Tower Records up in Lincoln Center. But I had a line on a job. It was an entry-level promotion assistant job at Blue Note Records. Susan Levin, who was the promotion person there, had talked to me, and she was thinking that she might need an assistant. So I moved up. I had an interview with them, and I thought I might have a shot at this job. Well, thankfully, after being at Tower for 6 weeks, I got this job at Blue Note. So it was promotion assistant, but it was working with Bruce Lundvall and Michael Kuskuna, 2 of my heroes in the business. Bruce was a very famous executive who had been the president of Columbia Records and had over at Elektra Records, and then had relaunched Blue Note Records. And he was a legendary figure in the business to me. And Michael Cascuna is a producer who's someone I really idolized because I was a big fan of like Woody Shaw and Dexter Gordon and all of these recordings that he had produced. So I was like, oh, well, I want to work in the business. I can work with Bruce Linval, and I want to be a producer. I can work with Michael Cascuna. Let's take this job. So during the day, I was answering phones and stuffing envelopes and calling retailers and radio people and stuff like that. And then at night, I'd be going out to hear music for those guys, or I'd be visiting a recording session or listening to demos. But I got the job because I was a working musician, which was rare in the music business. And I had retail, radio, print, publishing experience of some kind. So my resume was very well rounded. So not only did I kind of know bits and pieces of how all these elements fit together in the business, but I was a working musician who, when I met, Bobby Watson or Joe Lovano or John Schofield, when I meet these musicians, I could talk about music. Now, we weren't spelling out chords and stuff, but we were talking about real records and influences of musicians and, stuff that we could really have a personal dialogue about. So that's what really helped me more than anything else, is my musical experience and the fact that I was able to develop relationships based on trust and respect with artists. It wasn't just who's this kid who the label assigned to show up at the session. It was, one of the first projects I worked on was with Tony Williams, and I was, I associate produced it. I did all the production work while Tony dealt with the music. But, I booked the studio and I hired the engineer and I went to the session and I learned about where things were set up and booked everyone's hotel and decided when to order food. And then when times came after takes, it was like, hey, Matt, what do you think? And I'd be like, well, that was a great take. Maybe do one more with shorter solos, some shit like that, whatever it was. So I learned hands-on in that way. And thankfully, I got opportunities at Blue Note where Michael and Bruce gave me chances to work in the studio right away. Started producing Benny Green and Bobby Watson, and worked with Schofield and other artists that were there on the label. And at the same time, during the day, I was working really hard on the promotion and marketing and day-to-day A&R stuff. So because it was a fairly small label, I had an opportunity to get my fingers into basically every element of the business. So I was working as a promotion assistant, dealing with radio and retail. We hired independent publicists. And I dealt with Don Lukoff, who was the independent publicist we worked with at that time. He's still in the business. Got to know Don and got to see kind of what he did in conjunction with the label publicist. Joni Myers and some other really great publicists were working at Capitol and also doing publicity for Blue Note. Learning, and doing A&R work. So every day there'd be a box of cassettes that I'd get from Bruce Linval saying, listen to these tapes and give me your thoughts. So I'd be listening to demos and giving feedback and then some days there'd be, go out to hear an artist. And, one time it's go to suburban Philadelphia where there's this singer we're interested in signing, go check her out. So I get in the car service and go and I hear Rochelle Farrell perform the first time for the label. And I'm like, I called Bruce from there. I'm like, Bruce, we got to sign her. Anyway, that's a long-winded version, but that's kind of how it all got going and how it started. And, from there, after being at Blue Note for 3.5, 4 years, I got a chance to go to Warner Brothers where it was just A&R. It was just a creative job. Tommy LaPuma, who was a hero of mine, had been there and he left the company and they needed someone to do the music side. So I went there as an A&R person and thankfully was able to pretty quickly sign some artists I really believed in and do some more production work and work there for several years to try to get to the 12 and 13 years where I ended up building an operation and hiring staff and putting together a roster and doing a lot of catalog and just building a business model within the industry where we were able to be very profitable yet uncompromising musically. So that went until 2004, I guess it was. And then the bottom fell out of the record business, basically, post file sharing and, Napster and LimeWire and all of that. And people stopped buying physical product and layoffs happened everywhere and consolidation happened everywhere. And Warner got out of the jazz business. And there are other reasons. I mean, I was desperately trying to keep making it work within a model that had changed, and that wasn't going to work for what we were doing anyway. So, at that point I went independent, and since that time have just taken my skill set and my experience, my relationships, and continued to do my best to turn it into opportunities where I can be of service to the music, and be of service to artists. So a lot of record production work, a lot of consulting. And then in recent years, I had avoided getting into management, but I finally, had worked with Pasquale Grasso and then Samara Joy and produced their recordings, and they needed management. And I was like, well, someone's got to do this, and my skill set lends itself well to this job. And, the last thing I'll say about this, it's like one of the great things about the Warner Brothers situation, and Blue Note as well, was when I produced the recording, I had staff that worked with me or for me that could then spread the word. And I could personally tell the story of what happened creatively. I could talk about the artist's vision. I could talk about the decisions that were made to determine. And when I made the record, I knew the pipeline it was going to go through. So I could say, not making a choice to do something commercial, but to make sure that when you make a recording, you lead with what's going to be connective with the audience. It's honest and vulnerable and connective. And in many cases, that's encouraging an artist to do something that's even more personal, as opposed to saying, let's do something that's outwardly, commercial. The most longstanding commercial choices that artists that I believe in make are based on not commercial trends, but based on vulnerability and honesty and direct telling their story. So my ability to work with an artist to get to that point is what I've really focused on. And so once I was no longer in a label and I was just a producer, too many records I'd hand off to people who didn't know the story, and the records would fail. And there were a lot of missed opportunities where there were recordings that I made that I truly believed, there's recording by like Shayna Steele and James Maddock, and certain recordings that I made with Kevin Hayes. Like, there are these recordings that I made that I totally believed in that were made with the idea that they would be able to reach a wide audience. Becca Stevens' Weightless record. But then once they went into the business, there was no way them to reach the audience I thought they could reach. Once I got into management, I was like, well, at least now I can stay involved and find that audience, or at least communicate the vision to the partners, to the label, distributor, marketing people, publicists, online, digital marketing and social media people, like the touring opportunities, to be able to say, hey guys, when we made the record, this was the vision. And when this is performed live, this is the story that's going to be told. Let's sell this product as a connective story. So getting into management felt like a really natural progression. And the reasons I avoided it, which were like perception that I was going to have to be a babysitter, and all that kind of stuff. I'm like, oh, that's fine. I don't mind getting a call at 3 a.m. because someone's on the road and their flights I canceled. That happens, but it's not all the time. And I'm kind of a control freak anyway, so I don't mind having all these details happening. If it's all in purpose of telling a story and connecting an artist to an audience and being of service to the artist, it's a beautiful thing. I mean, it's a dream position to be in. But again, it's always leading with me with the making of the records. I mean, it's always leading with the production. Not that I produce every art. I mean, Samara Joy's new recording, she self-produced that recording. But I'm still love the artist and work with the artist and believe in the artist and believe in the recording and want to facilitate her realizing her vision. That's what I'm in this for. The same way that when I was at Warner, I didn't produce every record that I worked on there. So it's artists you believe in. It's seeing that you can be of service to them. It's getting the music out there to an audience that it's going to connect with emotionally, because that's what we monetize in the business. We're monetizing an emotional connection. If you're monetizing a commercial choice or something that's trite or something that's a flash in the pan, that there's a trend, that's not going to stick. What needs to stick is you're monetizing, love and passion and connection. And that's what lasts. That's what's real. And an artist willing to lead with that, and a team that's willing to understand that that's the product, is going to have long-term success with real music that's uncompromising, that at the end of the day, you look at it and say, well, I'm proud that I was a part of that. You know, I was involved in something I truly believed in that was honest. And if it's not successful, you can all still be friends and care and respect each other and know that you did it for the right reasons and you gave it a shot. And it didn't happen for reasons that are completely out of your control.
That was so inspiring. Thanks for that. So it's interesting that you talk about the process of, I mean, just your whole career in general, but you were talking about the process of guiding new artists and leading with authenticity, which is something that doesn't always happen in the music industry. We see with pop stars, we see with jazz stars, we see with any kind of music, really. So it brings up the point, and I ask this because a lot of our listeners are either just getting started in the industry, they're trying to figure out, how do I work with my art in an authentic way? What are some of the ways that you help to guide artists to be able to realize their vision without compromising their authenticity?
It's tricky very often, because what I said before about like vulnerability, let's say, very often there'll be a situation with an artist where we're talking about material, like when I'm working as a producer, and there will be, let's say it's original material, and there are 10 original songs we're looking at. And there might be a couple that are absolutely my favorites. And the artist is like, I don't want to do that song. That was written about, a relationship that's over, and it's like something that I don't believe in, and I'm not in that place anymore. And I'm like, yeah, but when I hear this song, I'm feeling a deep connection with a story that you feel very deeply. And that is our equity. That emotional story, that connection is the equity that we have to go forward with. And so what my choices might be something that's different from what that artist is feeling at that moment. At the end of the day, that's going to be the artist's choice about whether they want to record that song or not and relive that experience. There have been songs that become signature songs for artists that are from times in their lives that maybe they don't want to experience over and over again. But it's that moment, it's that story that is going to connect. The same with looking at outside songs for artists. You might take a song and say, I know an artist very well, and I'm like, this is a story I would love to hear that artist tell, because I know them as an outsider. The artist might not connect with it immediately. So what all this comes to is this concept of the value of having a translator. So the thing about an artist is they're the only person in the world that hears their music the way they do. Now, obviously, every single person hears every bit of music differently than every other person. But the creator of the actual work is the only one that hears all of this intricacy that went into the creation of the song, whether that's harmony and melody, whether that's a lyric, whether that's why is this hook, you're like, all this stuff. They know where all the bodies are buried. They know how the sausage is made, every other cliche we use, right? The listener knows nothing. The listener just is like, do I connect, right? So in the middle, there has to be someone or some way to translate that to that audience, where the artist tells the story, and that microphone is the actual listener's ear, where they're hearing this story directly from the artist. And that listener knows nothing about all that went into the creation of the song, knows nothing about what that story is being told, knows nothing about the many discussions that I might have had with that artist trying to convince them that this is a song that would be a great song for them to perform. None of that matters. So that role in the middle is so valuable to be able to be trusted, first of all, that the artist doesn't think that you're trying to push them to do something they don't want to do to try to pay off commercially or some crap like that. If the producer may have even written a song that they want the artist to perform, and they're going to make publishing revenue from it. Who knows? Or they might be under the hand of a business relationship that they're needing to deliver a hit for some reason. All these other factors can't ever matter. There has to be this trust with the artist. So that issue that I think you're bringing up, which is like, how do you deal with the artist in that way? It's just a matter of building trust. And thankfully, the older that you get and the more experience you have, like there are more people that, I've got a track record of recordings I've produced, and I've got stories about those choices, and everything doesn't hit at all. I've got a lot of regrets of choices that were made, or records that didn't do well that I think should have, or records that did well that I didn't think would. But all of those artists talk to each other too. So my assumption is that before someone talks to me, they've probably discussed with other people I've worked with and say, you can trust this guy, But as I said, I mean, a general question is really hard to answer in our area. It's like, what do you say to an artist? Well, there are a million choices. I mean, that's the thing about making records as a producer. There are literally thousands of choices being made through that process that all add up to that moment of hearing the final project. And every one of those is different with every artist. There are records that I've chosen every song that was recorded. There are recordings that I have chosen any songs. There are recordings that I chose every musician, and there are times that I just went in with an existing band that they'd been on tour and pressed record and told them whether we need another take or not. There are recordings that we recorded live to 2-track. There are recordings that we did a lot of overdubs and a lot of editing and a lot of comping and a lot of tuning and a lot of details. It's all different. So I probably didn't answer your question, but
no, you definitely did. It sounds like, I mean, just like in any type of life situation, it's important to have someone that you trust to be able to bounce ideas off of and kind of guide you.
And then one of the things that I think these days, there are a lot of recordings being made. It's almost an infinite number of things being put out. And because of what's happened in the business, there's not a lot of A&R going on, artist and repertoire positions at record companies where you have an actual creative person giving you input or direction. That role doesn't really exist. And that role, which in some cases management does take over, in most cases, the artist has been on their own doing that role. And as I said, the artist is probably the last person to be making those decisions because no one else hears the music they do. But for this reason, so many recordings that are put out these days are self-produced recordings by artists telling the stories that they want to tell, which can be fine to document their music. But that's not telling the story that needs to be told or needs to be heard to move people with music on an emotional level. So that translator not existing means that a lot of records are being made in a vacuum. So especially in the jazz and jazz adjacent area, a lot of artists making music for them and their friends, right? They're making music for people who aren't going to buy the music anyway. They're either going to hear it when it happens, or they're going to be on the guest list. It's like, that's not a business model. And it's not just that it's not a business model. That shouldn't be crass to think of it like as capitalism. I mean, we have to pay the bills. But what's most important is understanding if something truly is successful and does generate revenue, if it's of value, it's because that revenue was generated by making an emotional connection with an end user who then gives you money because their experience that your music gave them has value to them. So they're going to buy a ticket to a gig. They're going to, stream, 1,000 times a download, and then you streaming on a DSP, and you're going to get some money. Or they're going to buy a download, or they're going to buy a T-shirt, or they're going to contribute to your GoFundMe campaign. Like, they're going to give you revenue because you're giving them an experience that they value. There are artists who do exactly the music they want to do, and it goes out there and it has that emotional connection. Okay. There are Pat Methenys, okay? So it's not that every artist has to have that translator person. Many cases, that idealist artist who says, I'm going to make my music, put it out there, and it's going to reach whoever it does, but I have to be honest to my vision and control my art. That's not a bad thing for an artist to do if an artist feels that way. But you have to accept the potential consequences. And you have to accept the massive pressure you're putting on yourself, saying, I'm going to sink or swim based on doing exactly what I want to do. Like, an artist who's going to do that doesn't need me. Now, I worked with Pat Metheny. So Pat Metheny needed me on the business level, and I was able to get an audience for his music, and he trusted my ears to run ideas by me. He didn't need help from me to tell him how to mix a record or how to arrange a song or who to hire. Every now and then he'd say, hey, do you know any drummers? But at the end of the day, it was going to be his choice. But once that art is done, someone needs to find a market for it. So anyway, that's that.
Wonderful. Éamon, did you want to jump in?
Sure. Excuse me. Yeah, just to kind of get into some of the specifics of artists you've worked with. Take someone like Samara Joy, for instance. Was there kind of a particular moment that you knew she was going to be a star, and what were the things that you saw, the things you were looking for in general terms?
I mean, you never work with an artist thinking they're going to be a star or anything of that sort. I mean, with Samara, I was a judge at the Cerebon competition. So McBride and Dee Dee Bridgewater and Jane Monheit, and we were all the judges, and there were 3 finalists that were all really, really great. The other 2 were 30-ish European jazz singers who were incredibly talented and very advanced musically and all of that. One of them, speaking of Metheny, had written her own lyric to a Pat Metheny solo, and that was part of one of the tunes. I mean, it was very heavy. But Samara, who had only been singing jazz for a couple of years, got up and just had an immediate connection, an emotional response with the songs, and was a pure storyteller, a pure singer, and just moved me and everyone very emotionally. And so it was a case where this clearly is the spirit of what this competition about Cerebon and what this is about. So it was clear she was the winner. I stayed in touch with her after that because I wanted to work with her in the studio whenever the time came, but she was still in college. Then the pandemic hit, and it was during the pandemic, and it's like, well, let's go in and do a record. Let's go in for a day and just for her to get experience. So we went in to do the debut record. It's like a day in the studio with Pasquale and Kenny Washington, who both were teachers at Purchase where she was at school, and Ari Rowland, who was Pasquale's bass player. And we just went in with a trio and did a recording for the sake of doing it. She did a GoFundMe, and then at that point, she needed a manager, and I was like, I'm going to work with her. We have a good trust and rapport. I have daughters in their 20s. I want to make sure I protect her, all that kind of stuff. And then other things went where they did. I think that you pursue opportunities to present themselves with any given artist. And then you balance that with the artist's true vision and what the artist is comfortable with. So in Samara's case, it was no different than any other artist I've worked with on any level. It's like, she was new. So, it was encouraging her to work with a variety of musicians. It was encouraging her to try a lot of different material and continue to grow as an artist. It was creating live performance opportunities for her to get in front of people and to get a response from an audience and see what works and get experience as a communicator live, and going from there. But in answer, like the question is like, at what point do you know? It's all relative. I mean, I worked with Brad Mehldau. Was Brad Mehldau a jazz star? There was never any point with Brad other than when I first heard him, I said, this is my favorite piano player, and I want to work with him. And I signed him and produced him and worked with him with Joshua and worked with him on the Art of the Trio projects, and worked with a great manager at the time, and we set our goals on him touring with a trio and doing solo piano tours, and built it out from there. And the audience was the audience, So I don't think it's a matter of, again, ever thinking about whether someone's going to be a big star or not, or any of that. It's more, here's an artist. I believe in what this artist is doing. What's the potential audience for this artist? And, I'm working with someone named Stella Cole right now, whose album just came out last Friday. And she's a new artist. This is her debut album. But she's had huge success on social media. And she's not really a jazz artist per se. She's a traditional pop artist who's singing kind of in a Judy Garland, Barbra Streisand kind of zone, but with a jazz trio. But she's truly honest and about these songs. She's telling these stories directly and honestly, and it's proven to be very connective on social media, that people are connecting with the truth of what story, how she's going to tell these stories. And it's going to have the audience it's going to have. Do I think she's going to be a superstar or anything of that sort? I never try to think about that in those terms, because then you set yourself up for either failure or you set yourself up for giving bad advice. I mean, with Samara, it could be a case where, after we had the success with Linger a while, of course, I could have my feelings about what I'd like to have her do next. And we've had those discussions. At the end of the day, she needs to do what she believes in and what she feels she needs to do next. And the next recording, called Portrait, is a self-produced recording with an octet, with 4 horns, some original material, a lot of jazz standards, a lot of songs people might not be familiar with, some they will be familiar with. But it is 100% her artistic vision. And people who connect with the story that she has to tell are going to connect with it. And if they don't, they don't. And the next step is going to have to be like this one, a purely honest, connective story that the artist wants to tell. And, so that doesn't really answer the question. But again, any artist I work with them, whether it was going back to when I was working with the label and deciding who I would sign. My vision for any artist is I don't want to feed the jazz market. I don't want to feed a niche market. I want to connect with work with artists that are going to, I want them to be artists that are going to connect with people who don't know the code, like that aren't the inside jazz people. If it appeals to them, great. But I want to work with artists that are going to connect with people that don't know that. People that are lay people that are not the jazz audience. So even when I worked with Mark Turner or Larry Goldings, Itamar Borochov, I did a record with him last year, a trumpet player from Israel. The idea with him was like, these are his songs, these are original material, this is the band. My goal with him was, there's elements of this music that I think that if people don't know the depth of what you're doing, are going to connect emotionally with the story. How do we lead with that? So to me, that's what determines. So every artist is a star in their own way. If stardom is about connecting emotionally with people that don't know the technicalities of what's going on, to me, that's a star. That to me is appealing beyond a core audience. And that's always the goal, I think. That always should be the goal. Not at the expense of credibility, not at the expense of continuing to pursue your art and continue to pursue the artistry that is what improvisation can be these days. Not to, certainly encouraging artists to continue to compose if they're composers and pursue a depth of their composition and influences that they want to be influenced by. But the end product needs to be understood that the more that connects emotion with an audience, the more sticky it's going to be for you as an artist. And the more you're going to build a business model where you can fund everything else you do, without compromise. So
I think that itself is an extremely valuable insight for any, musician trying to develop a sustainable career. They might see some of these big names and think, well, maybe I'm not as talented, but maybe it's the connection and this authenticity that we've been talking about that should be the goal. Because it seems like even for someone like Samara, it was that grabbed you more than her, ability as a singer. It was the connection.
Oh yeah, I mean it's defined in the story about her winning the competition.
Exactly.
I mean, she won the competition because we were all blown away by the emotional impact and the soulful nature of what she was doing as a vocalist, and therefore she won. I shouldn't say won, like she won the competition, but she was the choice because we were moved by that. And that being moved emotionally by the music is what matters the most to all of us. And if you think of all of your favorite musicians over the years, John Coltrane, his lasting influence Sure, there's tertiary harmony and all the, whatever we're going to talk about, giant steps and all the advancements of playing the instrument and all of this. But at the end of the day, Coltrane is lasting because of the spiritual impact of the music he played. Okay. That's why people were lined up around the block when he played, at Birdland or whatever. It was people feeling an emotional, spiritual response to what he did. It was a love supreme. It was this other thing. You didn't need to know anything about giant steps harmony to connect with that. And if all he did was the harmonic and rhythmic advances as a player, then he wouldn't have had the same impact. So same with Miles. It's like as advanced as some of Miles' music was, at the end of the day, he was a personality and a creator of bands who put together bands with a sound that captured the time they existed in, and that created an environment where musically 1 + 1 would always equal 3, 4, or 5. So you would put together a band that would bring out the best in each other, that would then elevate the music to a whole other plane. That was all about personality and emotional impact and storytelling. And so all of our favorite artists all had that in mind, and all had that impact. No matter how technically advanced they might be, there's not a lot more, technically and harmonically advanced than Pat Metheny's music, but it leads with emotion and melody, always, at all times. Well, except for Zero Tolerance for Silence and a couple other projects, but for the most part, and that actually leads with emotion, with a certain kind of emotion. So,
Matt, thank you so much. This has all been incredibly insightful. I know it's going to resonate with a lot of our listeners. Since a lot of the people listening to this are up-and-coming musicians, people who play very well, musicians who want to know how to take their art to the next level, I'm wondering what the 3 key takeaways from this interview would be that you would like our listeners to walk away with.
It's hard. It's hard because, and I want to. It's like I want to come up with something clever, but I think that there are 3. There's this connection that takes place in music, and there's the intellectual, and then there's emotional / spiritual side of it, right? And that intellectual side doesn't mean anything if it's not there to drive the spiritual, emotional, side. So, for any young artist, to me, it's like, you got to know your shit. Like, you've got to put in your, whether it's the 10,000 hours thing, whether it's making sure that you practice your ass off, unless you play the shit out of your instrument, and unless you know all harmony, unless you're, you can execute what you need to execute musically, or have the vocal chops and the stamina to sing what you need to sing, you're not going to be able to realize your vision. So you have to hone your craft. It's extremely important to understand that you need to continue to hone that craft as an artist. Part of honing that craft is about being a sponge and continuing to take in everything and anything around you musically that is going to feed that other piece. So it's learning I guess 3 things are learning your craft and what you do on your own to make sure that you've got chops and that you've got facility and that you've got knowledge, intellect, content, language, a toolbox, that you've got all of these tools. The second piece is to continue to hone that and get outside influences. They're going to continue to have those grow into who you are as an artist. So that's working with other musicians. That's listening to trends that are out there musically. It's being open to other artistic pursuits. So studying film, studying chefs, studying painting and sculpture, studying dance, studying all other kinds of art that might influence what's in that toolbox and give it true individuality. But then the third piece of it, which is really all that matters, is storytelling. What is your story? And how are you going to tell your story in a way that it connects with an audience on an emotional, primal level? Okay. Now, within any of that, I haven't said a word about what's going to be commercial or what's currently happening in trends. Now, in that second piece, part of it is being aware of everything that's out there. But when you're aware of what's going on out there, like if you study, like right now, I personally think that, Olivia Rodrigo, Taylor Swift, and Billie Eilish are brilliant songwriters. Okay. Like major generational talents of our time, right? Now, you can dig them or not dig them, but studying their craft and understanding why they connect emotionally with a certain generation is essential. And it's your job as an artist to do that, right? It's not saying, oh, they're successful, I want to be successful too, so I want to do what they're doing. Let's do their music. No. What is it about them that is connecting? So to me, that third piece, which is understanding that your value in the market and your value as an artist is connection and leading with emotion that's driven by an understanding that other artists are doing it uncompromisingly. Now, given that, obviously, what is one person's compromise is not another person's compromise. So, I worked with Miles Davis on the project Doo-Bop. Okay. I didn't work with him personally. It was posthumous. He passed away right at the time I got to Warner Brothers Records, and I never had the opportunity to work with one of my heroes, which was heartbreaking to me. But that's a project that he did because he wanted to do a hip hop project. And he hooked up with this guy, Easy Mo Bee, and Easy created all the tracks. And Miles played over those tracks. And his involvement in that was more limited than it was on some of the other projects and nearly anything else that Miles had ever done, except, it was similar to Dingo and some of the other projects he did that might have been show up on a soundtrack project or something of that sort. But at the end of the day, that was an artistic choice where he said, I'm going to bring my story, my personality to the situation. So that's I think what I'll say. It's like, hone your craft, do the work, put in the time, then be open-minded to allow that to be influenced by everything and anything that's out there that's going to turn you into who you are and help you make some decisions about who you are and what you're comfortable with. And then understand that it needs to be translated to an audience. And whether that's through whatever team you assemble or who you collaborate with or how you put your music out there, make sure that you're willing to lead with emotion and vulnerability. That's what's going to last. And again, if that ends up that to pay the bills, you're going to have to do something else while you get your true music out there. If it's really who you are and you're leading with vulnerability and willing to connect emotionally, then that's going to be a lot more fruitful over the decades, hopefully, that it's going to be your career than something that's a short-term payoff.
What about recommendations that you would have for people that, let's say, aren't really wanting to be performers, but want to get in on the industry side, to be an artist manager, to work at labels?
I say this to every artist and any person I know. Get this book.
I have my copy in my room.
Make sure you've got the latest one because Don always updates it. The new one has a lot of nice stuff about streaming and a lot of that stuff in it too. The great thing about it is that I think that it's a really expert way to get into all the elements of the business, be able to go one level down or deeper into each part of the industry, but also to understand how all of these elements interact. So get to know that. If it's about people who want to be in the business but aren't performers, it's the same set of rules. I mean, it's the same thing. It's like if you're in it and if you have a passion for music and you want to turn that into a career that isn't as a performer, the equity that you've got to sell is passion. What is it about the music you love that makes you want to dedicate your life to it? And how do you get other people to feel that passion? And it's hard. It's really, really fucking hard because in the old days, you could get a job in a radio station, in a freeform radio station, in a college in some town, and have that radio show for 6 hours every Sunday or whatever. Play any music you want that you were based totally on your passion for music. And if other people connected with it, you'd be spreading the word. and you could feel a sense of accomplishment, a sense of value because you were moving people's lives. Those kinds of opportunities don't exist the same way anymore. You need to find them. You need to create them. You need to build something. And because there's been this democratization of the business, this tearing down of the structure still exists, but it used to be there were, I talk forever about this. I'll try to make it short. The silos of the business where it was like, here's marketing and promotion and publicity and sales and, all of those things still exist, but they're all intertwined and overlapping. And, it used to be that radio didn't generate revenue other than from the PROs. Well, now radio for many people has been replaced by streaming. Well, streaming generates revenue. So are the DSPs retailers, or are they radio, or are they kind of another thing? But the beautiful thing about it is that you can look at DSPs as both. And most importantly, you can look at it as a direct monetization of an emotional connection with music. And at the same time, look at it as a monetization of a commercial endeavor that's passive. So it forces you to think about your product and the balance between, well, a passive experience pays the same as an active experience because a stream is a stream, right? So which platforms and playlists are going to be of most value to an artist, and which ones are going to make an emotional connection? There it is. In that decision, you're right back to that same choice. Is this making an emotional connection, and how do I lead with the emotion? If you make a record that makes that emotional connection, that doesn't mean it's not going to get played on a passive playlist. So that's what I'm saying is every single element, we could talk in that way about every single platform or avenue of exposure within the industry today. And that choice is there. How do I lead with an emotional connection? How do I lead with moving a person? And if you're in the business and you want to do that, if you're driven by a passion for the music and every day you say, I'm going to spread the word, then you're going to succeed. It could be harder, but you're going to succeed. So if that makes sense.
That's perfect.
Okay.
Yeah.
Got it. And the other thing, the last thing I swear that I'll say is obviously, there's a lack of there's been a loss of the value of mentorship and institutional knowledge within our industry. I'm saying this as a guy who's 60, who has been in this business, and I thankfully had many mentors and have a lot of institutional knowledge thanks to my time in the business. And I know that the nature of what this thing is that we're doing here is actually to provide some form of mentorship and to pass on this institutional knowledge. But I have to say that no matter what, even if you're not, in this conversation right now, that value has to return more within our business. Too many musicians are insular and not looking to the masters to tap into the institutional knowledge that exists within the music itself. Too many people are surrounding themselves with teams of peers and friends as opposed to looking to master executives and producers and agents and record executives, people who have had these experiences. Because what I just said about radio and then streaming, if I didn't have the experience I have, I couldn't make that parallel and apply all the experience I have that is relative to actual radio and radio formats to what exists in streaming today. If you're just a kid that's only known streaming, if I didn't have the experience I had, I wouldn't understand the value of physical product sold at venue sales the same way that I do because I worked in a damn record store, So all of those connections and all that experience that the elders have, that potential mentors have, it's extremely valuable. So, whether that's if you're in school and studying with certain people and learning from their experience, do the thing that I did. I used to turn over records, and I turned over Clifford Brown beginning and the end. And it had liner notes on it written by Bruce Lundvall, VP of marketing for Columbia Records. And I remembered that name, Bruce Lundvall. And eventually Bruce Lundvall became my boss at Blue Note Record. Okay. That connection he had with the music and my studying of the music and my value I put on these people that had that experience meant that I would seek out those people who had those experiences that I wanted to share and I wanted to learn from. The same way that people would go on the road with the Buddy Rich Band or whatever else in the past. Musicians need to surround themselves with mentors and need to value institutional knowledge. And I don't want to say that in a way that's like, back in the old days, and you got to listen to the old men and listen to the, guy on the stoop. This is fact. This is knowledge. This is what's wrong in our politics today. It's like people aren't looking at the facts first and foremost and doing their fucking homework before they make a decision that's going to affect them for the rest of their life. You have to take it that seriously. You can't be fucking lazy. Do your homework and take advantage of those who've been there before you. And then you're going to have a formula for potential success. The end. Okay.
Thank you, Matt. I think I can speak for Éamon and I too. Just the fact that here at MusicWorks, we're getting this type of knowledge directly from Catherine, who's so generous, and we're so grateful to her.
You guys see it. I mean,
mentoring.
Things could have changed, but what we did before fed how we made it through the change. Mm-hmm. That's extremely valuable. But anyway, no, you're lucky to have her. She's a gem. She's one of my favorite people in life and one of my favorite people to work with. So, okay.
Matt, thank you so much.
Hey guys, I'm here if you need me for anything else. Appreciate it.
Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. Be sure to stick around in our community for upcoming events and for the second installment of this series, which will be with tour manager Paul Booth. See you next time.